The ACN podcast is made possible thanks to the generosity of our listeners and sponsors, including the Agile Alliance. As a nonprofit membership organization, the Agile Alliance is an excellent resource to help you along your Agile journey. To learn more about the Agile Alliance and our other sponsors, as well as how you can become a sponsor or supporter of our show, please visit acnpodcast.org for more information. And thank you for your support. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Agile Coaching Network. This is episode 97. If this is your first time to the Agile Coaching Network, this is all of us sharing our ideas and thoughts on this particular topic. Yes, we do have some regulars hosts that I'm going to introduce them, but keep in mind, the goal is to hear from everyone's experience on this podcast, not just the people who've been around in the industry a long period of time. We also want to hear people who are new or intermediate or wherever you're at in your Agile journey. We want to hear your opinion because it gives us more contrast to the things that we're all discovering and experiencing. For those of us who've been doing it for a long time, hey, you might actually teach us something that we didn't know. And you know what? You can teach an old dog new tricks. And yes, I'll admit I'm old. But we want to hear your experience. So if you have not joined us for our live recording event, then please go to podcast.org for details on how to register. We have a set of hosts that join us for a number of them for a lot of these episodes. And I'd like to thank all of them, especially as we're coming into the new year. Shauna, Diana, Jorg, Sheila Eckhart, Sheila McGrath, Hendrik Esser, and also I'd like to welcome April Mills to our cast of regulars. Our goal here is to get the conversation going. All 97 podcast episodes are most likely on your favorite podcast service. So if you go up to Apple, it's on there, it's Spotify, name your favorite service. You'll probably find the Agile Coaching Network there. Or you can go to acnpodcast.org. You can also do that by, one, going and looking at our sponsors, because their sponsors are very important for us. We are not a for-profit entity. We are a social enterprise that is trying to go bring in lots of perspectives and thoughts together. By you becoming a supporting member of us or becoming a sponsor of us, that helps us to pay for the bills of the show, things like the webinar system and other things. I like to reach out and say thank you, Agile Alliance, for your renewal. Welcome to 2025. They've been one of the longest sponsors that we've had, and they've been a good supporter of the Agile community for decades. So if you're not a member of the Agile Alliance, go take a look at them. And then also Cicada, as well as DianaLarson.com, Engine for Change, and New Agility, they all donate their time to this production. So therefore, we give them credit and go reach out to them. If you guys need any of their services, that would be great. And then lastly, I'd like to thank the supporting members, the people who actually signed up for supporting membership on newagility.com. And we really appreciate their support in 2024, helped us to basically bring this show to you. One other thing I was asked as I was doing the renewal for Agile Alliance, and as you guys know, Agile Alliance just got acquired by PMI. And we can interweave that into the conversation today. But there is a special town hall meeting that's taking place next Tuesday. It's at 9 a.m. Eastern time, which is early for us Pacific Coast people, but still, it's a great place that if you have any questions about the acquisition, what were the rationales, the reasons, the stuff that's going on behind it, this is their goal to give some more transparency behind the announcement that came out the first of the year. So please, if you are an Agile Alliance member or a PMI member, this is a great place to actually understand what the implications of that acquisition was. So please, go register for that. I'm not sure if there's a registration or if it's just going to be open and you go, but you can go up to agilealliance.org and they have some information there. And if you're a member, you probably already got a newsletter announcing this. It's timely to talk about Agile's role in mergers and acquisitions. I happen to, in my career, been a part of a number of different mergers. Most of that is from the Intel perspective. As people know, my background was I was a director of engineering for many decades, and before that I was an engineer. And I've been involved with acquisitions when we bought Chips and Technology, when we acquired McAfee, when we also did Wind River. I can go on the list. Intel at the time was like really acquiring a lot of companies. And what was interesting about it was that I think of the Intel impact and I think of the acquirees impact. And I have to admit that Intel didn't get changed that much by these acquisitions, which if you think of the goal of an acquisition is you want to take the best of both companies and you want to mix them together and you want to either one, maybe reinvigorate your own culture or your own productivity or whatever it might be, you're not just acquiring a technology, you're actually integrating people, the talent into it. And I have to say, and hopefully an Intel executive isn't listening to this, but they know this already, and this is all public info now, but there was a lot of mergers that did not go that well. They hit the goals. They didn't hit what we were trying to achieve when the acquisition was made. And in fact, I was looking at several case studies, and this number is all over the place, which is anywhere from 50 to 90% of the mergers fail to meet their objectives across the industry. And the cited reasons why, some of it is some of the process that's used is very heavy. Also, there's an isolation between the work that's done up front during the acquisition to when the teams are actually starting to integrate. And those two teams sometimes don't talk, meaning that if you think of the dynamics of whatever went into the acquisition, the secondary team that takes over, that gives people the badges, the cultural update, the way we work, all of those things, they don't talk at the very beginning of the process. They're brought in way later. Feels waterfall because it is. And then what happens after that? We get anything from the cultural incompatibilities, the resistance to change, improper change management, and also the impact to productivity and morale, because there's also, and everything else, you're trying to deliver what you already had on your plate. And I can go on. But my questions are going to revolve around this. Does Agile have a role in mergers and acquisitions? My feeling, and I want to get your guys' opinions as well, is that the due diligence and the pre-close activities, rapid exploration, the hallmarks of iterative work that we do in Agile really keeps a lot of stakeholders engaged as we iterate. Not everything is figured out in the very beginning. Same thing can be said for as we're going through the merger, the culture adaptations and the integration work that we do. The Agile mindset is a great framework to say, this is how we work. I remember one time I was down in Mexico. We were doing an Agile event down there. And I remember one of the employees talking to another employee and just saying, that's not how we do things here. We follow this manifesto. This is how we work. And so there's some built-in things that are in Agile that help to bring things together. The last one is just the optimization that takes place as we're going through the merger. And mergers are never really done. It's a constant. And as a matter of fact, even Agile transformations are never done. It's something that's about continuous improvement and learning. Anyway, let's get to the questions for today. What do you feel is Agile's role in mergers and acquisitions? And you can say that I don't think Agile has a role in M&A. You could say that I think we should stick with the existing process, but give me reasons why. Second, do you feel that Agile leaders and coaches should be at the table? Not at the table later, but should they be at the table early in the process of the merger so that there's a good continuity that's built into the plan itself? And then bonus question, and this is for my friends from the Agile Alliance, if you guys are on the call, or PMI, any of their leadership, if they're here, thank you for being here. If not, they can listen to this podcast later. Do you have any of your own advice for the Agile Alliance and their M&A process as they're going through this acquisition? I would love to hear any thoughts and ideas on that. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce April Mills. I've worked with April for a number of years, probably about a decade. We worked at Intel together. She's a great change agent. She's done lots of great work around the space. And so, April, what do you think about this topic and what are your answers to these questions?
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ray, for having me. Excited to join. Thanks, everybody, for being on the call. Really eager to get to know more of you. I think one of the big keys for why a company that has a lot of great Agile folks in it would be better at M&A is because you actually are thinking about how can I make things better? chances are good most M&As that fail have a lot of people sitting back and saying, I sure hope the people that are involved have figured out how to make this work. I'm going to sit back and watch. Spectators, we could call them. But we know Agile folks aren't spectators. You're active agents of change. And so I think the more Agile folks you have in a company, if they're acting as change agents, then the better it should go. All right, reaching out to other teams. What are your practices? How can we get the best of those? How can we merge these together? Or, Ray, to your point, how do we hold fast with what I call a policy buffer and say, we follow the manifesto. We're happy to share it with you, but we're not going backwards from these practices or away from these practices. So I think that those are the key things I've seen that help success, and why I would love to find the people who are passionate about Agile if I were helping with an M&A.
Cool. So what about from the perspective of best advice? You're a coach, you're being brought in, or you're a change agent being brought into the process. What's your first step in engagement with the process?
I would say the biggest thing is showing up with a curious mindset, right? Being open to learning from the other folks and making them feel comfortable that the goal isn't to say which of us is in a bigger organization and therefore our method should win. I had that conversation with a leader at Intel. We're bigger, so they should just obey all of our processes. That M&A didn't go well. But so showing up with curiosity, I think, is really key, because there's a lot to be learned and benefited from, as you pointed out in your opening. But I find too often folks don't show up that way, and they show up to fight for their processes. You don't want it to be a cage match. Two will enter, one will leave. That doesn't work well, doesn't help the organization move forward. So showing up with curiosity, trying to get into the room and say, look, chances are good you need more help than you have staffing for. I'd love to put some of my extra time into helping this be successful. That's a great way to get in the room, even if you weren't invited.
Awesome. Thank you. Shauna, have you been a part of one of these M&As, and what's your advice?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. And I think April brought up some really good points. Some of the things that I see where M&As fail is that there's a lot of avoidance up front in terms of we don't want to change the way that the team's working. We want to continue to see that they're productive. And there's this avoidance of being able to use this time. I think the team that is being acquired or the company that's being acquired knows that change is coming. And so I think that it's a good opportunity to align on objectives, to align on approach, to figure out how we have shared principles around this. So when we think about Agile and how we do those things and making sure that we are aligned from the beginning around things like objectives and principles, right? Then I think that we can use the opportunity to get the people who are coming in to be part of the change strategy and approach. And to be honest, I haven't seen a lot of successful mergers and acquisitions because I have seen a lot of this avoidance. Where I think that Agile leaders and coaches can help is to really facilitate some of those practices of making sure that we have quick feedback loops, right? So if we think of who the customer is in all of this, and if we go towards more of a customer-centric approach, I would say it's a lot of the acquired folks that are coming into the company. And so we need to make sure that their thoughts are being addressed early. We have a chance to maybe change direction. How do we bring feedback loops, retros into the process? And I don't see that's happened. And then the third thing for me is really, it becomes more of an exercise of, we have to get this into our HRIS system for payroll. And it becomes more about assimilating the group within their tools, which becomes not very productive on behalf of that organization because it really doesn't align with any strategy or approach. And I think that there's so much more that can be done just to have the conversation early about what does success look like on behalf of this for both you as the company coming in and for the company acquiring. What does success look like? And let's talk about that a little bit more. Yeah, that's my thought. And I think as we're thinking about the Agile Alliance and PMI, I really hope that they're having those discussions, because if I think of culture specifically, let's say that a bank is acquiring a product development or a tech company, right? There's very different cultures. A bank is going to have a lot more governance. They're going to have a lot more institution-based approach, where the tech company may have had a lot of room for innovation, and so the cultures are very different. So as we think about that, I think it's important to recognize the strengths that each one of the groups are bringing to the table. And is there an opportunity here for them to learn from each other? What does that look like? So it's not just the simulation of, for example, the Agile Alliance coming into the PMI, but how will the Agile Alliance strengthen the PMI so that they can really operate together as a much stronger organization?
It's an interesting point. So just to contrast, PMI is big. They probably have, I think the last time I looked at their LinkedIn, said they have about 600 employees. Agile Alliance is small. I think they have 4 employees. So when you think of the big fish and the little fish,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a heck of a power dynamic issue.
Yeah.
How do you nullify that power differential, or at least the seemingly bigness of one to the other?
Typically, the acquisition, not always, right? Sometimes acquisitions are had just to swallow up another organization. But sometimes the company, and in this case, I feel like the Agile Alliance has been a huge part of helping software development teams specifically, and in that space, really a shared group of principles and values and a way of working. And I think that anybody who's acquiring that is really, there's this huge opportunity. And so you can't necessarily look at the size of the people, but it's like, what is this organization bringing and how is it strengthening us? And most likely there's going to be thought leaders in that space to leverage. You can't, every company has their key people. And I think that's the same for organizations. Like, this is going to be a big opportunity to bring those folks to the table, or bring the organization to the table to really help redefine that space. And I think the Agile Alliance has an opportunity to really bring a lot more in the Agile space, as PMI has already adopted a lot of Agile principles and practices. It's like, how do we continue to strengthen that so that they can really operate?
Thank you. Diana, what's your opinion on this?
I really wanted to listen to what April and Shauna had to say, because I know they've both been through this in different ways than I have. And so I was curious about, and I loved what April said about showing up with a curious mindset, and Shauna was talking about including customers in the feedback loop. And that as we were continuing to talk, or as the conversation was continuing, it really made me think about, when are we having very frank conversations? If we're looking at an M&A, and I've been directly involved in failed M&As when I was part of an organization that someone else wanted to acquire, and in the end we said no thank you. And I've observed a lot of acquisitions over the years, and what I notice is a lot of what we've been talking about is that the big fish takes the little fish and says, do things our way, and so on. And so I think it's really important, with that curious mindset that April talked about, that we have conversations about what is it that's attractive about each of the parties to the other. Is it their intellectual property? Is it their tooling? Is it the approaches? Maybe in the Agile case, is it the approaches that they're using? Funding and assets, stakeholder groups? What are the valuable pieces that one party brings and the other party brings, that we feel like we want to put these things together? And then what I often see, have seen in the past, is that even when those conversations happen, then in the rollout of the M&A, those valuable pieces don't get as honored as they need to be. I saw a great network diagram one time about a large company who acquired a small company because the small company was very innovative, and the large company thought they had become stodgy and not keeping up. And so they acquired this small innovative company, and after 9 months or a year, discovered that the big company was no more innovative than it had ever been, and the small company was getting less innovative because of the pressure of all the processes and procedures and philosophies of the big company. And so they stopped, and they made that merger successful by saying, wait a minute, what we wanted was innovation. How do we enable this smaller company to bring their innovation ideas into the big company? And they started shifting around some people in leadership roles and giving them opportunities and permissions to influence other folks in the organization, to talk about what made the smaller company innovative and how that might get incorporated into the larger company and so on. And then when they checked in again after several months, they saw that they were making progress on their original goal for the acquisition. I think if you're not sharing why are we doing this? Why do we want to do this? And is there enough value here? I'm assuming that the leadership of Agile Alliance, and I know that I wasn't a part of that conversation, so I'll just put that out there. But I do know that there were people who were part of that conversation who weren't just staff members at the Agile Alliance, people who had had more influence over the years, who understood the organization really, and so on. And I think that's a really important piece, that early on we honor what each other is bringing to the table and identify those things that we would really appreciate your help with this. And conversely, we would really appreciate your help with this other. And how are we going to make that happen as a part of our M&A process? So I think that's a really important one. And certainly if the agile mindset of a company is one of the big assets that they're bringing, I don't know if that's the case with the Agile Alliance, but in the broader industry roles, if that approach is part of what makes the company being acquired or the organization being acquired attractive, then the agile leaders and coaches should be at that table, because they are the ones who can help make sure that's being considered all the way along. If it's not, if it's purely, you got a bunch of customers and we just want them and we want to put them in our mailing list and that's it, then the agile mindset maybe isn't as important in that instance and isn't necessarily what's making the acquired company be successful in this sense. It's like everything else, it's more nuanced than just yes or no and this or that. There's a lot of things to be considered as we move through these things. And in our case, in my case, part of why someone was wanting to acquire my company had to do with the intellectual property that we had. But through discussions, we realized that there was no way in the context of this particular acquisition for the integrity of that intellectual property to be protected. So we said, no, this is too important to us. We don't want to follow through in this other way. It's like job interviews, right? You have to feel like it's still a choice for both parties at any given time. The job seeker needs to be interviewing the job giver as much as vice versa.
In that, when you were talking about the innovation piece, I was thinking about Innovation Inc., that book. I think it's like Ed Catmull, I believe the name of the author.
Yeah.
And they had an interesting approach to the acquisition of Pixar, where they actually made Pixar leadership the leader of Disney animation, which if you read the book, even people who really see themselves as being very innovative leaders and they built a great organization like Pixar, and they get in and they just are bogged down by the other culture. And he has chapters about how he thought he was just going to go in, hey, we're all going to be innovative. And no, it didn't take place.
Yeah,
So
Scott Sampson in the chat notes that the name of the book is Creativity Inc.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's a great book. It really is a great book. I love that story.
Yeah.
I'm going to go away now.
Okay. Sheila, what's your comment on this?
A couple of things. I agree with Diana. It's very nuanced. I have been involved in a merger, which was not an acquisition. It was an actual merger. And this was a two come in, one stays kind of situation for probably 60% of the company. And that creates animosity. And from an agile standpoint, it's a challenge in trying to get people to be open when they know that there's a possibility that they're the one that is not staying. Once that particular very challenging piece is over, then agile needs to kick in, because at that point, you really need to have people working together toward a goal. You need people to understand that that what happened wasn't personal. The companies merge. You're not going to have two CIOs. There's going to be one CIO, and one CIO is going to be, you're either going to get demoted or out. But once all of that is completed, you need everybody to start working together. You need to have that open mind and that curiosity, as everybody has been saying. You need to hear the other one. You need to be transparent with what you have been doing. You need to be able to share. You need to work as a comprehensive team and not against each other. And I have seen in these cases people working against each other. And in those cases, if you don't have somebody that can help from an agile coaching standpoint to bring everybody together, it takes a really long time for that togetherness to happen. So that was one of my experiences.
I agree with that. The question of it's us versus them or we. How do you shift the conversation to we?
Right. And that's where I think agile coaching comes into play, because agile coaches are really good at that, because we deal with that even on some teams that aren't part of a merger.
That's true. That is very true. Thank you for that.
But I've also, I'm sorry, if I can just
go ahead,
also
please.
talk about, but I have been part of acquisitions where a company was acquired. Most of the people in the company are staying. Their operations are going to be a little bit different. There's some gap analysis. Some of their processes need to be folded into the larger company's processes. That's somewhat of an easier start out in an agile way. And I have seen that be successful from the get-go when handled with an agile mindset.
That's rare.
It is. I think it really has to do with whether or not any of the companies already has a good agile sense and has good agile champions that could get things going in the right direction. The one thing I want to say about the Agile Alliance and PMI, and I was really pretty sure this was going to come up today. I think that it's important to, as was pointed out, to know why is this happening? What is the benefit? What is the benefit for me as a member of the Agile Alliance for this happening? I think this town hall that you talked about, I think that's going to be great. I really think it's important to be transparent for people to understand what changes are going to happen. What does it mean for the members? What can I expect? I feel like I am a customer and I need to understand what this means to me.
Awesome. That's great advice for them. Again, I'll point them to this podcast. I'll also share some information, at least with their leadership, as we get through this call, which is great. Thank you. Catherine, hi. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. So backing up, I was aware that Agile Alliance had some financial concerns that were related to people maybe not registering for the conferences the way they had in the past, so that the revenue streams into the organization were not as juicy as they had been in the past. And I guess I'm just wondering whether Agile Alliance went looking for a organization to merge with, or were they approached by PMI? How did we get here?
Okay. I'll give you full disclosure. I used to work with the Agile Alliance. I know what it was in its heyday as far as how the organization made its dollars in order for it to do its operating and its mission work. As people know, it is a nonprofit. It's a 501c6, which means that it is the way that it can acquire dollars is not like a donation nonprofit where people get a tax benefit. People become members of the organization, and they can do trade as a trade association. They can do things like conferences and other things. And the conference was their biggest money-making opportunity in order for them to support what they were trying to do with the Agile community. And they made a lot of investments of those dollars into things like, if you ever go to a meetups group and you use the meetups application there and it's an Agile group, more than likely the Agile Alliance funded that, or they funded a whole bunch of other initiatives throughout the years. What happened was COVID hit. And unfortunately, if you go look at the clauses and contracts, companies like the Gaylord and others, and I don't mean to bash the Gaylord because they have a contract that they had between them. They basically had to try to negotiate, but they didn't have to not pay for the years that the event didn't take place. That drained them a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of other trade organizations hit the same barrier. There was a lot of hurt going on in that space. That combined with, I think we had some messaging out by big companies who started to say, hey, we're going to fire all our Agile coaches. And suddenly there was a downturn in their membership. And so you add all that up over time and whatever their operating costs were, because they still had to go pay for that big old conference, regardless if they made money or not, then yeah, it became a financial drain. So I don't know, for one, if that is exactly the reason or they found another opportunity. I think this town hall will be there. But my guess is if you just go look at the public record of their financials, they probably, if they didn't get more members and people returning to the conference, they probably had a very short runway, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the financials, that all makes sense to me. So then I'm still stuck with questioning why PMI, because I know PMI has made movements toward accepting the existence of Agile and Agile teams. There's an Agile PMP certification. It has been for years now. I guess I'm just wondering, how did we wind up on this date? Who was on Tinder first?
I think the interesting thing is there's been collaboration between the two organizations in the past.
Yeah.
There's been published documents together. There's been all sorts of people, if they do something with the Agile Alliance, they got PMI credits or whatever the little tokens you get for being there. And so I would imagine, and I don't know any of the internal details at all, they probably had a conversation with multiple organizations, if I had to guess. I think the challenge, though, is both organizations are 501c6s. They both are member organizations. So the question is, how do you involve your members? Because if you don't involve your members and your sponsors and everyone else, then that could be challenging for them. Because people might look for other places other than those two organizations.
Sure. I've been a PMP for at least 15 years, probably longer than that. So I know in the Washington, D.C. area where I live, PMI regularly has a very big chapter here, and they regularly have monthly dinner meetings where if you are a member of the chapter, you pay a fee to go to the dinner and collect PDUs and network. There's also some more smaller meetups that you wind up paying them a smaller fee just for your dinner and a conversation about project management. But I think on the chapter level, they have an additional source of revenue because they're getting it at that local level rather than everything from a PMI mothership, if you want to call it that.
I think the Toastmasters model is great. I think this is one thing that I'll say in my tenure, I was trying to influence the Agile Alliance to do more of a chapter type of model. Maybe this will help to influence them to do that, because I would love to go to a Portland meetup group, but I would love to be able to provide the support to the local community growth and then from there going to other things. So I really appreciate your opinion on this.
Yeah.
Jorg, you've been sitting quietly. Didn't Intel buy you at one time?
Yeah, they did. And that was pretty one-sided in terms of size, obviously, and was pretty rapid. So I only joined in the second step. First step, the startup I joined got bought by Infineon first. It was
Okay, but you got to meet me out of the whole deal though. So that's a
and that is actually what I was coming to, because you're not merging one company with another. You're merging different people, hopefully with different views, but identical goals together. But you have a lot of people who are really afraid of this. So even if you're in the really big part and you're a manager because local processes, what the heck of a risk is it if these local processes change? Everybody coming in with the greatest idea is a threat. And that depends on your mindset. If you're open and curious, you should be able to form a coalition of the willing, actually, to bring people together. But if you dictate you work with that guy and both don't want to do it, then it will fail on a very local level and in very much detail. And that is exactly the point. I met a lot of great guys in that activity. I learned a lot. And actually the entire site and team that got acquired got divested then again because of shift, and they're still together. And everybody I'm talking to still today, so a long time since, is telling me what they took away from that experience as good things, as people they still know and talk to and learn from. So actually there was a lot of coming together, but it didn't work out in the business sense on some levels because expectations weren't really aligned. I once had a joint bringing the team together, and the question was, if this fails, what does it mean? One team said, okay, we move on to the next project. And the other team said, okay, then we get fired and we have to look for new jobs. So how do you bring those people easily together? Not by force. And you need to be really sure how to align it. And that's where Agile comes in. Do it in small iterations. Then you can align and change and bring in new people or rotate something out, change the focus, or whatever you do to really get where you want to be.
Fear is not a great place to have any sort of open mind. How do you close the fear gap?
First of all, by outlining the vision. What is this thing really about? Is it just bringing in people who can do your job better? Or do you bring in people who can give you new ideas to be more creative, because your creativity is still valued? But obviously, you need somebody to have fun with you. Just very simply said, if you look at innovation. Or is it just to get the customers of the one side into the other company? Or is it to combine businesses and talk to two sets of customers together? Very often there's just that very straight business view, and then it just depends on how your personal outlook is. Are you looking for the good things? Or are you looking at the bad things? And bring those people who see the opportunities, bring them out and get them to talk and understand what they are. And if this is not the vision of the merger, then stop it.
Thank you for that. Sheila, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. I was trying to figure out what's in it for PMI with this merger. And it occurred to me, they've had the PMI ACP for a while, but that's still pretty formulaic. and they acquired disciplined agile. And that's also formulaic. So I think what they're looking for is more flexibility, or the perception of more flexibility, which the Agile Alliance certainly, what's the right word for it?
Embodies?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I think that's why they wanted it. And hopefully they will get that, because it is a different mindset. It is a different perspective. And there has to be a way that they can make things more flexible. There is a government, and we were talking about the DC area. The federal government has some kind of a mandate to be more agile that was written into some bills that were passed. So they have a legal requirement now to be more agile. But I've talked to people who've tried to implement that. And it's interesting because it's not, aside from waterfall, even before you get to waterfall being a little bit more structured and repeatable processes, you've got bureaucratic red tape that you're starting with. So it's a challenge. And I think that's something where there may be a big win for PMI and for the Agile Alliance if they can make this work. Myself, I've been involved in a few things where there either were mergers in progress or there had been. One company I worked for had 5 regional presidents, because I'm not sure how many companies they started with, but there were a bunch of small companies that were regional that wound up getting consolidated into one national company. But each regional president had been a president of a company, or had been that, I don't know whether they were the one, but someone had been in charge of a regional company. Each one had a different way of doing things. There's not just one right way to do it. And we were trying to get everybody on the same page as far as what data do you want to capture? How do you want this process to work? There were different ways they could go about marketing the product. There were different ways they could go about fulfillment. They were very different. In one part of the company, in one region, salespeople had a pencil and paper, and they took orders and they wrote things down and they called them in, and somebody typed them into a system. And a few days later, things started to happen. In another region, all the salespeople had state-of-the-art laptops with all kinds of bells and whistles. And they would go out, and part of their pitch was, we can get this set up today. I can hand over the product today. So that's a very different approach to the same problem. And those are just 2 variations. There were more than 5 variations on the way things were being done, but they needed to have some kind of consensus to get to, what do we actually want it to look like? What's going to make sense when each region operated differently? And we don't necessarily have the same information for each one, because they didn't think the same stuff was important. They didn't capture it. And the way they conducted business was different. And you don't want to spend a whole lot of time and energy on retraining everybody, but you have to spend some, because I've been in other companies where what they tried to do was, we want to make the new system look like the old one because we don't want to spend money on training. But of course, if you want to make the system look like the old one and you replace the old one because it was totally inadequate, you recreate all the problems of the old one because you're not really changing. And people want change in the sense that they want other people to change. They don't want to change themselves. And it does turn into kind of a cage match a lot of times, because they want their way of doing things to not change. They want everybody else to change to their way. And if you got a bunch of people in there, I don't know, sometimes it feels more like roller derby or something like that. It just can be there can be a lot of voices being heard. So that's where I think Agile can be a really good thing, because with Agile, you try to find the commonalities and build the consensus and talk about what the ultimate wins will be. What's the true underlying business need, not solve the symptoms.
Roller derby, I thought it was more like rollerball, if you guys ever saw that old movie. April, you put up your hand. What's...
No, I wanted to add on to what Sheila was saying, because I think this disconnect between what I've called like phase 1 Agile, team level Agile, where people wanted something better and chose something better and implemented something better for themselves, right? That's the the motivation behind the manifesto, right? There's a better way of working out there. I'm going to declare it and build it for myself. And right, a decade ago when we were doing a lot of Agile stuff there at Intel, that was the motivation. It was passionate people committed to making work better for themselves and for others. And then at some point, the Agile movement, we can use the clever phrase, jump the shark, right? And it became, we know the better way of working. We should get everybody else to do our better way of working. And that became a lot of the top-down Agile implementations of, we're going to change the enterprise and thou all shalt be Agile. And that's a bigger difference in terms of whether or not you create people who are passionate about the change with you or are victims of your change. And I think the disconnect between that phase one, where it was what I call driving change, where people are choosing the change for themselves, and that phase two, where we were driving people, you'll be Agile or else, is a really important distinction to draw as we talk about M&As. Because if the reason why we love the way we work is because I've chosen it for myself, how do I help others feel like they have that choice too? And how do we choose to come together versus feel like one of us must win? If we frame the game that way, we will create winners and losers. But we're choosing to frame the game that way. And I just want to back us up to that notion of we actually have more agency and control over what game are we playing. A fixed game with one winner or an infinite game where we continually learn from each other. It doesn't have to be that winners and losers. It usually is, but it doesn't have to be.
I think that's a very great point. I think that one of the things, and I'll contrast this back with you brought up Intel. We never demanded anyone did Agile. When we originally got our charter, the executive vice president said, should we mandate this across the organization? And I said, no, we shouldn't. We should allow people to come to us and we will give them, if they want to be trained, we'll train them. If they want coaching, we'll coach them. If they want to kick and scream and say, don't do this to me, we're not doing anything to you. And I think we found a lot of growth that occurred because we took the stance of, hey, we're a community of practice. You can join us. Come on in. The water's great. We're almost approaching the top of the hour. I just want to pitch out as if anyone's got any upcoming classes or training or things that people should be paying attention to in 2025. Is there anyone want to say, hey, I've got this going on. You should come attend.
Hi. Yeah, I'm pretty excited. I've got Agile Fluency Game Workshop coming up in April. And for people who want to learn to facilitate the Agile Fluency game, which is 2.5-year simulation, or a simulation of 2.5 years in a software project. And there's a lot about it online. If you go to agilefluency.org/game, you can read about it and then get in touch if you're interested. And right now, we've got a pioneer price going, which is the cheapest it will ever be. And then also, I'm looking forward to starting a series of sort of wisdom talks, which will be similar but different to what we're doing here at the Agile Coaching Network. So I hope people will keep out an alert for that. It'll be a four-session series over 6 weeks, and I'm really looking forward to that experiment. So that's going to be super cheap because it's an experiment.
Okay. And quick clarification, are those online or are they physical?
The Agile Fluency Game Workshop is an in-person workshop in Portland, Oregon. And the other one is going to be an online sessions.
Awesome. In Portland, that's in my backyard. Yay.
Yes.
Catherine, what do you have?
Hey, there's a Liberating Structures intensive 2-day training coming up in the Washington, D.C. area, which I thought might be of interest to those of us looking for PDUs, professional development units, which is a very PMI concept, or just branching out and networking within the Agile community a little bit more. I also wanted to mention that I know of 2 positions open for business analysts at the place where I work, which is George Mason University. So if you are looking for work or know a business analyst who's looking for work, please get a hold of me and I'll see what I can do about getting your resume in front of people.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. We've got a lot of people in need right now, so thank you. April, what do you got going?
This year, I've departed Intel and I am now launching my own thing called Engine for Change. So more is going to be coming soon on all of that. But for those of you who maybe haven't come across my stuff yet and were interested in some of the things I was talking about today, I do have 2 books that are up on Amazon. If you search for April K. Mills, they come up faster. It's Everyone is a Change Agent, and the second book is Change Tactics, 50 Ways Change Agents Boldly Escape the Status Quo. So if any of that brushing up on your change skills is appealing, you can check those out while I build up the company and some course offerings and other things coming up in the future.
Awesome. Can't wait. And lastly, a New Agility. If you go up there to newagility.com, we have some online classes that you can take. If you're a supporting member, those are free. You can just go in and take those at any time. If you're not a supporting member, then there's a small fee associated to them, but it's about different things about Agile culture and the Agile principles, and a couple of other classes will be announced soon. We've got another one coming out shortly. Hopefully next month we'll be launching one talking about strategic agility and ways of implementing that. Other than all of that, I want to thank everyone. Gosh, I'm just so happy this call is back. In December, I was sitting in my lovely house at the time and thinking to myself, oh, it's time to do the ACN. No, it's not. And so I was sad a little bit through the holidays because we didn't have this get together. Our next live event will be on Friday, February 28th. Go to acnpodcast.org to register. Hopefully you guys have a great, I think in all countries that listen to us, I think you all have Valentine's Day. Hopefully you guys go off and do something for someone you love, and even maybe some people that you might not love as much, but still give them love during this next month. And also, if you want to listen to any of the other prior, you can go to acnpodcast.org. And as said before, any of the online where you get your podcast today type of services, we should be up there. Hit the like buttons, hit the star buttons. We do want to get more people listening to in 2025. By the way, we've already been voted as one of the top podcasts already that as we came out of 2024. So that's really cool. I thank the organizations that look for different podcasts and voted us so high this time. So hopefully we can continue to keep that momentum going. With that, have a great month. The ACN podcast is for educational and informative use only. If you'd like to know more about the ACN community, please come up to acnpodcast.org and support our show.